Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally by thy mercy attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had request for an extended introduction.
Minister's requested leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the pleasure today of introducing a respected partner, community leader, and someone that I have the honor to call a friend, Tribal Chief Mark Arcan. Mark is the Tribal Chief of the Saskatoon Tribal Council and a member of the Muskeg Cree Nation located in Treaty 6 territory. This past March, the Premier and I had the tremendous honor of participating in a monumental event with the signing of 3 agreements with Tribal Chief Arcan and the Saskatoon Tribal Council member chiefs. The Partnership Agreement, First Contact Panel Agreement, and Delegation Agreement signify not only the renewed relationship with the Saskatoon Tribal Council, but also a new path forward in us and our working relationship with Indigenous partners and communities. The Partnership Agreement and First Contact Panel Agreement will ensure that we are working together as partners, side by side, supporting children, youth, and their families. The Delegation Agreement reestablishes the Saskatoon Tribal Council First Nations Child and Family Services Agency. Saskatoon Tribal Council will join the 17 First Nation agencies delivering child protection services on reserve to First Nation communities across the province. Mr. Speaker, these agreements provide the province and the Saskatoon Tribal Council with an opportunity to make a meaningful and lasting impacts in the lives of children, youth, and families. We are pleased to report some great news. In just these recent months since signing the agreement, 14 children will be returned to their communities and reconnected to their culture by the end of May as a result of our partnership agreement. This is great news, and we look forward to doing more of these success stories in the coming months. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in welcoming my friend, Tribal Chief Mark Arcan, to his Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the Minister in welcoming Tribal Chief Mark Arcan, who does such incredible work on behalf of the 7-member Nations of the Saskatoon Tribal Council, but also in the larger community. The presence of STC within Saskatoon is profound, certainly in my neighborhood. We've benefited from the STC Health Centre and other activities of STC. I just want to ask all the members to join me in welcoming Tribal Chief to his legislature and thanking him for his leadership.
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to you and through you to all members of this Assembly. I want to join with the Minister of Social Services, the Leader of the Opposition, in welcoming Tribal Chief Mark Arcan to his Legislative Assembly, welcoming him to our capital city, but also to thank him. Thank him for his advocacy on behalf, as the Leader of the Opposition said, not just his seven communities that the Saskatoon Tribal Council represents, but his advocacy with this government and with his community and the broader community on behalf of First Nations people across the province. He does a tremendous amount of work, Mr. Speaker. If you have the opportunity to go for lunch or coffee with Tribal Chief Arcan, you are going to get down to business very quickly, and that's appreciated. It's appreciated very much. Your strong voice is appreciated, I know, by the Minister, and I want to thank him for the effort that he has put in, the effort that the Minister has put in with respect to the most recent partnership agreement that was signed with respect to Child and Family Services in those seven First Nations communities that is already bearing fruits of bearing results, if you will, Mr. Speaker, in real results for our children in this province. I also want to thank Tribal Chief for being easy on me so many years ago when we went into the corner together in a hockey game. He had big elbows and a big jaw, Mr. Speaker, and he was tough. He was a tough customer to come out of the corner with, Mr. Speaker, and many a guys actually didn't make it out of that corner from time to time. And the games that we had in Muskeg Lake, his home community, resides in the community of Roster and Shelburne. But most importantly, I want to thank Mark for his friendship with so many in this House and so many across the province, and his real belief in our communities in this province can be better and will be better together. So thank you, Chief.
Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Requesting leave for extended introduction.
Members requested leave for an extended introductions. Leave granted. Recognize the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a few guests I want to identify here today, but I'll start with two very special guests. Doug and Gloria Archer have joined us here today. Of course, Doug was the former mayor of Regina and certainly led in that capacity. But Doug and Gloria epitomize both being business leaders and community builders. They were recognized as Citizens of the Year in 2017 for their many efforts, Mr. Speaker. They've given back in a significant way to the U of R Cougars, to the Regina Multicultural Association, to Mosaic, and I'll be recognizing their efforts for the Brighter Futures for Children here today in a statement. But what they've done on this front is remarkable, and those efforts have raised nearly $1 million for the SCEP Centre as well as the Regina Early Learning Centre. So I ask all members to welcome Doug and Gloria Archer to their assembly. Well, on my feet, I'd also like to recognize Ryan Riffle, the VP, Senior VP of Business Development with Knight Archer Insurance. Ryan's a big part of that Bright Futures fundraiser as well, so it's great to have Ryan here. And I also have Shauna Forbes here today, the leadership of the SCEP Centre here in Regina that does such important work, foundational work, when it comes to early education and early learning, Mr. Speaker. And I also have Marianne McGrath that's here, Mr. Speaker, the head of the Early Learning Centre. Marianne and Shauna and their respective organizations are on the front lines of preparing young people for success in life and extending hope and opportunity, and they work tirelessly to do their work and make a tremendous difference in so many lives. So I ask all members to recognize certainly Ryan, but Shauna and Marianne McGrath to their assembly. And while still on my feet, Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to welcome my mom and dad, Faye and Craig Weatherspoon, to the Assembly. I've introduced them before, so I won't go on there. They were doing pickups today from kindergarten, preschool, Mr. Speaker, and so they stopped over here with William. I introduced William one other time in this Assembly, Mr. Speaker. He was 7 days old 5 years ago, so he's up in the top row. William, can you give us a big wave? This is my little buddy who is up for any adventure, Mr. Speaker. He loves art, he loves hockey, he loves football, he likes hiking and hunting, canoeing and camping, and fishing, and he wanted me to share that he always catches bigger fish than his dad, Mr. Speaker. I want to welcome William to his assembly and to certainly on the floor share how much joy and happiness he brings to his mom and dad. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments.
Mr. Speaker, it's one of those days. I'd also like to ask for leave for an extended introduction.
Minister's requested leave and extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce several individuals who took part in the CAA National Slow Down, Move Over Day event that took place this morning in front of the Legislature. And Mr. Speaker, they're all sitting up in the top row in your West Gallery, Mr. Speaker, in the West Gallery. And I'd ask them to sort of wave when I mention their names. Bruce Anderson, Director of CAA Saskatchewan Board of Directors. Fred Titanic, President and CEO of CAA Saskatchewan. Jeff Rower, Board Member of the Roadside Responders Association of Saskatchewan. Steve Skowardko, Past President of the Paramedics Services Chiefs of Saskatchewan. Christine Nimchik, Director of Corporate Communications, CAA Saskatchewan. Dave Uchar, Manager of Fleet Operations for CAA Saskatchewan. Sean Hansen, tow truck operator for CAA Saskatchewan Fleet. And Bob Kellen, tow truck operator for Astro Towing out of Saskatoon. Mr. Speaker, safety on our roads is a priority for this government. It is the law to slow to 60 kilometers when passing working tow truck operators, law enforcement, and emergency vehicles on our highways. I'm proud that our government was the first in Canada to permit blue and amber flashing lights on tow trucks. Because it's all about safety, Mr. Speaker. These individuals represent a number of people and groups that we want to ensure return home safely at the end of their workday. I want to personally thank them all for the work that their members do for the people of our province. I'll ask all members of the Assembly to welcome them to their legislature and remind everyone, slow down and move over. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join with the Minister with welcoming these guests to the Legislature today. On behalf of the official opposition, we appreciate all the work that you do to make our roads safer. I know there's been times when I've required a tow truck on the side of the road, and I would not want anything more than to make sure that people who are coming to assist us are safe, and that other people who are working on the roads are safe as well. So it's a good reminder for us to drive safely when we see people working on the side of the road. And I think SGI has been doing a wonderful job reminding individuals about how important it is to slow down when we see people on the side of the road, and having those amber lights are very important. So on behalf of the official opposition, we want to thank you for all the work that you do, and we want to welcome you to your legislature. Thank you.
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join in welcoming one of the guests just to introduce in the Assembly, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Steve Skowardko. Steve I've known for a number of years. He's affectionately known by all that know him as Waka Steve. He's from Waka. He owns Waka Ambulance. And not only that, he's the mayor of Waka currently. Past president of what was SEMSA, as the minister pointed out, is now Paramedic Services Chiefs of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Steve for all of his work and all of the people that he's worked with over the years. Ground EMS, the backbone of our medical system, our EMS services in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, for all the work that he does and they do. And just acknowledge, Mr. Speaker went through a bit of a trying medical situation the last little while, and he took a day and a half off, and then he's back at work, like a lot of our providers are. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to welcome Steve to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Athabasca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I ask for leave for an extended introduction.
Members ask leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy on many of my travels to meet some very friendly, outgoing, and personable people. And one such person, of course, is one of my staff members that work in the caucus office here at the Legislative Assembly. Her name is Kat Norton. And Kat is a very hard worker. She's always very cheerful, and she's always willing to go the extra mile and do all she can to help. She's a very, very good worker and a very kind person. And you always wonder, where do this kindness and these great genes come from? Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a very special guest in the Assembly today. I'd like to welcome a very gracious and accomplished lady named Joyce Duncan. Joyce is Kat's grandmother. Joyce was born in Rochdale, England in 1921 and immigrated to Canada when she was 8 years old. She lived in Ontario until she moved to Saskatchewan in 1990. And in the Second World War, Joyce worked as a bomb girl in a munitions factory in Ajax, Ontario, where she was responsible for putting detonators in the munitions. She did this until she developed chemical poisoning and worked on the Lancaster bomber until the end of the war. She lived in Oshawa, down the road from Ed Broadbent, and he was a really good friend of her mom's, and Joyce fondly remembers having him for tea in her living room talking about the campaigns. She was also a top breeder of the wire-haired fox terrier in Canada. Joyce is also an avid writer. She has a World War II poem in the Canadian War Archives in Ottawa. She continues to write even now, almost 98 years young. She keeps a keen eye on what goes on in her legislature and is as good as anyone in holding us all to account. Mr. Speaker, it is very important for me to say, Joyce, welcome to your assembly. We hope you have a very pleasant visit, and thank you for your service to your country and, of course, keeping us all to account. Welcome.
Recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask leave for an extended introduction.
Minister's requested leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to introduce and recognize some very special honored guests that are here today. These people are the recipients of the SaskTel Pioneers Harry H.D. Allen Memorial Achievement Award. The SaskTel Pioneers were formed in 1947 from retired SaskTel workers. In 1984, another SaskTel retirement club was formed in Regina that was later named the Harry H.D. Allen Member Club. Now, not that it's part of my notes, and I always follow my notes very meticulously, except every day. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that Harry Allen was a SaskTel worker who happened to be my neighbor in the 1950s and early 1960s. Not that that has anything to do with it, but he was a fine person and was very active in the neighborhood. There are now over 4,200 active SaskTel pioneers in Saskatchewan, consisting of both active and retired employees. The pioneers support and volunteer for projects that help improve the lives of many people in our province. Each year, the pioneers present the Harry A.D. Allen Memorial Achievement Award to volunteers, and this year it was presented to the volunteers from the Infant Hearing Assessment Program, or IHAP, for premature babies. For over 36 years, with the help from the SaskTel pioneers, roughly 28,500 newborn babies were tested in the Regina General Hospital neonatal unit. SaskTel pioneers were an integral part of the volunteer program at the Regina General Hospital in the neonatal unit, the regular nursery, and the developmental assessment clinic. Their work addressed the importance of early detection of hearing loss in newborn babies. So I want to ask that all members join me in welcoming, and I'm going to ask them to wave, Phyllis Pearson, Betty Spence, Joan Fletcher, Mark Hedgion, I hope I've got it pronounced right, Greta Barman, Darlene Artemchuk, Dorothy Fledelic, Sharon Selzer, and Doris Clark. Mr. Speaker, to the legislature, and all of the members here, I want to offer our thanks to these dedicated volunteers who have donated their time and love to these special babies. Thank you. Thank them for their generosity and kindness, and welcome them to their legislature today, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just to join with the minister very briefly, I'm sure the member from Indian Head Milestone is happy to know. Just to say thank you very much to the SaskTel pioneers who are here today. They're a tremendous force for good throughout all sorts of different places in the community across this province of ours, and it's tremendous to have you here today to be recognized for that wonderful work that's not just at the Infant Centre at the General Hospital that is done by SaskTel pioneers, but again through all sorts of different places in the community. So on behalf of the official opposition, thank you very much for all that you do, and welcome to your Legislative Assembly.
Hear, hear. I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you to this Assembly, I'm pleased to introduce a school group, Mr. Speaker, from the Rosetown-Elrose constituency, from the Swanson Christian School at Delisle, Mr. Speaker. They're in the East Gallery. They're accompanied by their teacher, Christina Bays, and board member Pat Esau. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to meet with them this morning before lunch, had a great chat. They're back to take in the proceedings this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask all members to please give them a warm welcome to their Legislative Assembly.
I recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sensing a pattern, I'm going to go ahead and ask for leave for an extended introduction.
Members requested leave for an extended introductions. Leave granted. Recognize the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to join with the member from Regina Rosemont in welcoming some very important guests in the Speaker's gallery, to Doug and Gloria, of course, who need no introduction in this Assembly, but ought to be well recognized and well known for not only their business dealings, their very successful Knight Archer insurance, but also their philanthropy in the province. They give very willingly of their time and of their treasure, and our community is made stronger for it. So I thank them and welcome them to their Assembly. Also, I see Shauna Forbes and Marianne McGrath there from SCEP and Regina Early Learning Centre, respectively. Just welcome and thank you for all the important work that you do. And Ryan and the group of you for the important work and fundraising that you do on behalf of Regina's children with the Brighter Futures Gala fundraiser. Thank you. I'd like to also welcome Joyce Duncan, Kat's grandma, as she's known in our caucus, to her Legislative Assembly. And Mr. Speaker, it's not every day that I have notes prepared for introductions, but I do today because one of you or both of you have done a very good job with Kat, ensuring that she's well prepared and organized, and she keeps us, she tries to keep us in the same stead. Mr. Speaker, Deborah Norton has a very impressive CV in her own right. She's a constituent in Regina Lakeview, and she spent much of her career balancing a very important critical care nurse job while raising 5 kids. She started her career in infection prevention and was the AIDS Regina second chairperson, at which she received a community award for her work there. It didn't end there, Mr. Speaker. She also received the Mayor's Human Services Award, and she also spent time, she was the first RN in the Kidney Care Clinic, formerly called the Chronic Renal Insufficiency Clinic, and her team there won an award for their research on the statistical benefits of the CRI program in managing diabetes. Mr. Speaker, something that no doubt has had benefit for countless citizens across the province. She's now in retirement, and like many in retirement, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't mean that she's not busy. She's a faculty member on the nursing division of Sask Polytech and in the practical nursing program, and devotes her time as a board member for the Mackenzie Infant Care Centre. Mr. Speaker, those in the neighbourhood know Deb from her friendly wave from her deck, and as one of the first in our neighbourhood to have a little library, a little red library in front of her house, which really adds to our neighbourhood. Thank you, Deb, for all of the work that you do in our community. Thank you both for raising such strong women who have also given great benefit to our community and to our caucus. And I invite all members to welcome these two women to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite have recognized and introduced a number of our early childhood professionals that are here today. We would like to join with the members opposite in welcoming those people to the legislature today. There is absolutely nothing that can help a child more than having all of the supports that are necessary and beneficial during early childhood. This is what sets a person up for life to become a lifelong learner and having the best opportunity for success either in high school or in post-secondary. So I would like to use this opportunity to thank not just the people that are here today, but the early childhood professionals all the way across our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, you'll be relieved to know that I don't want to ask for leave for an extended introduction. I do, however, want to introduce 31 grade 12 students who are here from my constituency in Campbell Collegiate. They are accompanied by Jill Abbas and Sebastian Potvin. I see that a certain young man who is a favorite of mine is also sitting in that gallery, Mr. Tariq Al-Khatib, who is a close family friend of ours, who will be playing for the Thunder next year, Mr. Speaker. And also Bruce Anderson was in the gallery. He's left now, but he's also been a very important part of the Hill Business School, and I'd also like to welcome all of these individuals to their Legislative Assembly. Thank you very much.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to welcome 50 grade 5 students from St. Peter's School in Saskatoon in the constituency of Saskatoon Westview, and they're located in the West Gallery. Accompanying them are their teachers, Jeff Sagansky and Anna Thompson, and parent chaperones, Trista Gavin, Meredy Warren, Lizelfa Ramirez, Brianne Grenier, and Kristen Nugent. I look forward to meeting them after, and I ask all members to welcome them to their assembly. Thank you.
Good as a member for Regina Pasqua.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you, through you, to all the members of this assembly, I would like to introduce 26 students from Ecole Harbour Landing School, grade 7 and 8, sitting in the East Gallery today, Mr. Speaker. I want them to, I cannot see them, I want them to wave, and I ask all the members to join me, welcome all these kids from Ecole Harbour Landing School in their Legislative Assembly. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly on behalf of the government side, I'd like to also welcome Gloria and Doug Archer to the Legislative Assembly this afternoon. They're well known in our community for their business acumen, but also giving back to the community and for serving the people as mayor. Thank you for all your contributions to our city and our province.
Oh, thought there might have been a new rider signing in the gallery, but okay, next time. Presenting petitions. I recognize the member for Cumberland.
Slow on the draw, Bradshaw.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to present a petition on behalf of Northern residents. Many Northerners are in need of dialysis treatment and are traveling many, many hours per week to have this treatment. Many elders and community members are experiencing physical pain and fatigue driving on bumpy northern roads. The travel is costly and complicated. Let me read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan build a dialysis center in northern Saskatchewan so that Northerners can have treatment closer to home and not have to spend so much time on travel and money. On traveling. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by many good people of northern Saskatchewan. I so present.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Carrot River Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to present a petition from citizens who are opposed to the federal government's decision to impose a carbon tax in the province of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, this tax is being forced on us by a federal government that hasn't a clue about the economic impact it has in Western Canada. In fact, all of Canada. They forget about the 100,000 plus job losses in Alberta and Saskatchewan due to their war on oil. With Alberta now coming to their senses and getting rid of the NDP, we now have 60% and growing population of Canada against the carbon tax. Unfortunately, the NDP right here in Saskatchewan is in favour of a carbon tax that would devastate our economy. I think that the leader of the NDP is just following his friend Justin Trudeau, thinking that the budget will balance itself. If he were ever on this side of the chamber, he'd put our balanced budget in jeopardy. Mr. Speaker, this just shows how desperately out of touch the NDP are, not with just Saskatchewan people, but the majority of the people in Canada. I would like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectively request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action to cause the Government of Saskatchewan to take the necessary steps to stop the federal government from imposing a carbon tax in the province. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by the citizens of Carrot River.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member for Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to present petitions on the increase and the expansion of the PST by the Sask Party government onto, well, pretty much everything, Mr. Speaker, from children's clothes through insurance, of course, construction labor, Mr. Speaker. And in this case, what we saw was a Sask Party government that saw a slowing economy and chose to slam on the brakes, Mr. Speaker. When we look at the imposition of the PST onto construction labor, this is the epitome of a job-killing tax, and the impacts speak for themselves. Permits are down all across the province. Important projects have been shelved, Mr. Speaker, and sadly, thousands of hardworking tradespeople have lost their employment, so many that have been forced out of Saskatchewan in the pursuit of employment, Mr. Speaker. A loss for them, but a tremendous loss for our province as well. The average family is facing almost $800 more per year, and the petition reads as follows. We in the petition that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to stop saddling families and businesses with the costs of their mismanagement and immediately reinstate the PST exemption on construction and stop hurting Saskatchewan businesses and families. These petitions today are signed by concerned residents of Regina and Saskatoon. I shall submit.
As a member for Saskatoon, Newtana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to present a number of petitions today, all calling for the restoration of the family class designation to the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program. The folks who have signed these petitions would like to bring to our attention the following. Sask Party government's changes to the SAMP have eliminated the family class as a mechanism for immigration into Saskatchewan, and that family reunification presents economic and social benefits to Saskatchewan. The Sask Party government is not willing to consider a redesign of SINP and does not consider this to be a priority issue. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to restore the family class designation of the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program and support the reunification of families. Mr. Speaker, the individuals who have signed these petitions today are from the city of Saskatoon. I so submit.
Recognize a member for Athabasca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I stand in my place again to present a petition on behalf of the town of Balgony, Saskatchewan, because somebody has to represent them in the Assembly. And Mr. Speaker, this particular petition is as it relates to their never-ending battle to continue fighting for Main Street access to Highway 1 in the town of Balgony. And Mr. Speaker, the people of Balgony and area in the prayer reads as follows, respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan take the necessary steps and actions to leave the west in, west out driving access for vehicles into and out of Balgony, Saskatchewan at the intersection of Highway 1 and the main street of Balgony. We also respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan put up a lock gate on the apron between the eastbound lanes and westbound lanes of Highway 1 and Balgony, Saskatchewan Main Street intersection. This gate would allow emergency services access to the eastbound lanes of Highway 1 at Main Street Balgony intersection, but would not allow the public access to cross east and westbound lanes. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have had page after page after page after page after page of this petition presented in this Assembly. And the people that have signed the petition, Mr. Speaker, are from Pilot Butte, they're from White City, they are from Regina, they're from Emerald Park. Mr. Speaker, the list of the different communities from McLean, from Fort Capel, from Edenwald, White City, Balgony, Regina. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on of almost every town in the province of Saskatchewan that have wanted to support Balgony in their battle. And Mr. Speaker, somebody has to represent Balgony. We'll do the job, and I'm proud to present these petitions here today.
Recognize a member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today to present a petition to provide funding for improved testing, diagnosis, surveillance, and treatment as it pertains to Lyme disease, vector-borne, and other zoonotic diseases. These citizens wish to bring to our attention there has been a dramatic increase in the number of ticks found in Saskatchewan over the past few years. The increase of ticks puts Saskatchewan residents at risk for Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases. Measures must be put into place to protect Saskatchewan citizens from Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases. And those citizens who do contact Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases need to have the proper treatment available in a timely manner with the newest treatment available. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to provide transparency with the surveillance of Lyme and other tick-borne diseases and to provide funding for improved Lyme disease testing, diagnosis, and treatment. These petitions are signed by individuals from Prince Albert, Swift Current, Pennant, Kindersley, Makwa, Abbey, Cabri, Birch Hills, Langham, and Warman. Mr. Speaker, I do so present.
Hear, hear.
Recognize a member for Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to reopen the Buffalo Narrows Correctional Centre. Mr. Speaker, the individuals who signed this petition wish to bring to our attention the following. Mr. Speaker, the closure of the Buffalo Narrows Correctional Centre left 15 people out of work and financially impacted their families and the local businesses in Buffalo Narrows. The closure also hurt the elders within the community because they relied on the help of the inmates who did odd jobs for them. The closure of BNCC also hurt the families of the inmates who were learning new skills while working with skilled employers to obtain employment upon release. And the closure of BNCC took the inmates far away from their families, which made visitation very difficult or non-existent at all. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan immediately reopen the Buffalo Narrows Correctional Centre to better the community for future generations to come. Mr. Speaker, this was a closure that happened a few years ago. It's important to raise again because it hasn't stopped impacting this community. The individuals signing the petition today come from Buffalo Narrows. I do so present.
Recognize a member for Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for real action to fight climate change. Mr. Speaker, the government and we agree on several things. We agree that Justin Trudeau's carbon tax will hurt Saskatchewan's economy. Mr. Speaker, we agree that charging polluters also is effective. And Mr. Speaker, we believe that climate change is real. But Mr. Speaker, that's about where it ends. Because Mr. Speaker, we believe that there needs to be real action to address climate change. The residents of the petition signing this petition, Mr. Speaker, want to bring to our attention that Saskatchewan has the highest number of greenhouse gas emissions per capita in all of Canada. Mr. Speaker, they want to bring to our attention that under the Saskatchewan Party government, Saskatchewan's emissions have increased. They want to bring to our attention that the Saskatchewan Party government has slashed programs and funding for the environment and put our province on a backwards course. And Mr. Speaker, they want to bring to our attention that evidence of our backwards direction on climate change is evidenced by the steady increase in payments under the Provincial Disaster Assistance Program. Mr. Speaker, the residents signing this petition are from Regina, and they're some of the many hundreds of people who gathered here on the steps of this building a few weeks ago with the students, and they respectfully request in the prayer to the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan enact a real plan and allocate appropriate funding in the provincial budget to tackle climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, helping families transition to energy-efficient homes, and encouraging everyone in the province to take real action to protect the environment. I so support.
Reading and receiving petitions. Statements by members. I recognize the member for Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to acknowledge May 13th to the 17th as Sexual Assault Awareness Week here in the province. Our province has unacceptably high rates of sexual violence, and it is important that we as a government, along with our communities, work together to reduce and prevent sexual violence and abuse. Yesterday, we passed legislation, Bill 172, that will allow survivors of interpersonal and sexual violence to have the ability to take 5 paid days of leave in addition to 5 unpaid days. We have also opened up and funded women's shelters and initiatives to help victims of this terrible violence find safe and healing spaces. Last week, Mr. Speaker, our Minister of Corrections and Policing, along with the Minister responsible for the status of women, launched a pilot project here in Regina for the Philadelphia model. This initiative allows experts in sexual violence to work with police agencies to review cases of sexual assault and abuse to ensure that investigations are thorough and properly classified. Mr. Speaker, the safety and well-being of our communities always comes first. Providing support to those who encounter such terrible violence is a priority, and though there is more work to be done, we will continue to work collaboratively across government and with our community partners. Thank you.
Recognize a member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prince Albert Raider fans have waited a long time for this. It took 7 games and an overtime period, but that made the victory that much sweeter. Last night, the Prince Albert Raiders won the 2019 Rogers WHL Championship in Game 7 of the series against the Vancouver Giants. Mr. Speaker, the Raiders played in front of a full house, and the Raiders certainly made us proud. Prince Albert citizens have all joined in the Raider frenzy, and this season, our city has bled green and gold. Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge former Raider and Director of Players Personnel, Ron Gunville. We lost Gunner early in the season, but the success of the Prince Albert Raiders is a direct result of the hard work and commitment of Gunner, and we know he is with them in spirit. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to commend the Vancouver Giants on a game well played, and to their fans who are always courteous and friendly. The Giants played a great series against our Raiders. Now it is on to Halifax for the Prince Albert Raiders to play in the Memorial Cup Championship, and I can hardly wait for the Raiders to bring that cup home to Prince Albert. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members join with me in congratulating head coach Mark Habshad and the Prince Albert Raiders on winning the 2019 Rogers WHL Championship and offering our best wishes as they move on to the Memorial Cup Championship. Mr. Speaker, the song in Prince Albert is Go Raiders Go.
I recognize the member for Prince Albert Carleton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What a game it was last night, Mr. Speaker. After 34 years, our Prince Albert Raiders finally won, again, the WHL Championship title. How fitting, Mr. Speaker, that the top 2 teams in the WHL battled it out for the WHL Championship, and it goes to overtime in Game 7. But, Mr. Speaker, last night in Prince Albert, at a packed Hauser Centre surrounded by over 3,300 screaming, loud, and supportive fans, the PA Raiders won that Game 7 with an exciting overtime goal against the Vancouver Giants. I'd especially like to congratulate Dante Hanoun, who scored last night's overtime goal that solidified their spot in the Memorial Cup. I'd also like to recognize the team's goaltender, Ian Scott, who had an impressive regular season and recorded 5 shutouts in the playoffs. His determination and stellar performance earned him the ultimate title of being the WHL Goaltender of the Year, as well as the MVP for the WHL playoffs. Now, Mr. Speaker, the boys are getting their bags packed and ready to ship off to Halifax to represent the city of Prince Albert and our province and the WHL at the Memorial Cup. We cannot wait to see how well they do and I'm confident that we'll be seeing that Memorial Cup trophy headed back here to Saskatchewan where it belongs. Good luck to the Raider players, Coach Habscheid, GM Curtis Hunt. I now ask all members to please join me in congratulating the Prince Albert Raiders on winning the WHL championship.
As a member for Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, in April, I had the honour of attending the Brighter Futures for Children event at Casino Regina. This is one of the many times that I've attended this amazing event. For the past 13 years, Brighter Futures has raised nearly $1 million to support the work of the SCEP Centre and the Regina Early Learning Centre. I'd like to thank these organizations for their work, their very hard work every day, and the hope and opportunity that they extend to so many, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge an outstanding group of people at Knight Archer Insurance and their leadership, Doug and Gloria Archer. Knight Archer organized an amazing team of 32 staff who were involved in the night of fundraising, and over 125 staff contributed their time to fundraising. Knight Archer has organized Brighter Futures since 2005. This year they raised $75,000. Since the event's inception, they've raised $915,000 through Brighter Futures for early learning here in Regina. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in congratulating Brighter Futures for Children for another year of success, and I'd ask all members to join with me in thanking Doug and Gloria Archer and the incredible team at Knight Archer Insurance and all of those other individuals and performers that were a part of Brighter Futures for Children for their remarkable efforts in supporting young people and early learning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And as a member for Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a new solar farm will be operating north of Maple Creek in the near future. Projected to begin running by September 2021. On February 5th, the project representatives Andreas and Robert McCallum were in Maple Creek to discuss the details of the project with the community members. Maple Creek was the chosen location due to its optimal year-round sunshine, and this site is adjacent to an interconnectional point. Mr. Speaker, the location also is favorable environmentally. Attributes include non-sensitive wildlife species or habitats on site, or non-domestic grasslands, and no greenhouse gas emissions created. Perimeter Solar estimates 34,000 solar panels will be generated around 18 million kilowatts of electricity each year, which is enough power to about 2,500 homes in Saskatchewan per year. Citizens of the Maple Creek will benefit greatly from the Perimeter Solar project, leading to stabilized and reduced energy costs, job creation, and community growth. Mr. Speaker, the project has a few final stages left in the project that will take place from now until September 2021. I now ask all the members to join me in recognizing the town of Maple Creek for their efforts in leading this project for the community. Thank you.
As a member for Saskatoon, Churchill Wildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On April 12th, I brought greetings to the Saskatoon Achievement in Business Excellence Awards. The Deputy Premier, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Central Services also attended the awards gala. Mr. Speaker, the awards are organized by the Greater Saskatoon Chamber of Commerce. For over 100 years, the Chamber has played a significant role in enhancing Saskatoon and Saskatchewan's economic climate. This year, the theme of You Are the Chamber put a spotlight on the members who have strengthened the business community in a significant way. There was a diverse group of entrepreneurs and businesses in attendance, but what they all had in common was their Saskatchewan roots. Our daughter and her husband, Amy and Carl Peters, own Market Mall Auto Service, and we're pleased to be nominated for the Customer Service Award. A few of the winners of the night were Sherpa, a cloud-based business management platform, and Fitness 2J2, which is a First Nations-owned community-based health and wellness company. The big award of the night, Business of the Year, went to LB Distilleries. This Saskatoon-based craft distillery and event centre was founded in 2012 by 3 fun-loving Flatlanders who have mastered quality spirits and liqueurs by using the best locally sourced fruits and grains. Mr. Speaker, I now ask that all my colleagues join me in congratulating all the nominees and winners of the 2019 SABEX Awards. Thank you.
Recognize a member for Kindersley.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the federal leader of the NDP in essence declared war on Saskatchewan's oil and gas industry and the thousands of people employed in it. Jagmeet Singh declared that the NDP are against Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, against fracking, and here's the real kicker. The NDP wants a complete end to the Canadian oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, this means Saskatchewan continue to sell its oil at a deep discount, or if the NDP had their way, not sell any oil and gas products at all. It means Saskatchewan people lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars in resource royalties that help pay for so many services we have all come to rely on. Apparently the NDP would rather see those profits go to our US, Russian or Saudi Arabian competitors rather into hospitals, schools or highways here at home in Saskatchewan. And it means the NDP do not care about the Saskatchewan oil and gas workers or their jobs. You know, Mr. Speaker, who should speak out about this radical policy? Perhaps the economy critic. The member from Meewasin, the same member who attends anti-pipeline rallies, the leader of the party that hides their anti-pipeline resolutions, the leader who refuses to go to rallies against Bill C-69 or C-48 and the carbon tax, which undoubtedly will hurt our economy. Mr. Speaker, we can protect the environment. Our Prairie Resilience Plan can reduce greenhouse gas emissions without destroying our economy. Will the members opposite join us in opposing their federal leader and his
It's time. Question period. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We learned this morning that 63 workers at the Allen Nutrien Mine had a very scary experience. We're very happy to hear that all of them are now safe and applaud the emergency workers that helped to make sure that was the case. We also learned this morning that there are 80 workers who are facing layoffs at Nutrien's Vanscoy mine. This is on top of layoffs announced in August. Obviously, we're all thinking of these workers and their families at this time. Can the Premier update the House on what steps will be taken to make sure that these workers have the support that they need? Thank you.
I recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we were made aware with respect to some changes at the one of the Nutrien's facilities where they are shifting some of those resources into another facility. Mr. Speaker, we are of the understanding that there will be a net reduction in some positions here in the province, although the individuals that are affected by this will have, to our understanding, the opportunity to continue their employment with Nutrien at one of their other facilities. Nutrien is a company in this province that employs in excess of 4,000 people in communities right across this province. The potash mining industry, Mr. Speaker, employs many tens of thousands of people in our communities directly and indirectly. We've offered the services of our rapid response team to those individuals that feel the need, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to work not only with the potash industry, but all of the industries here in the province to expand our opportunities to continually increase the careers that are available for the people that live here today, but also for the people that choose to move here in the future.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we appreciate a response from the Premier. We don't always get one. For example, when Saskatchewan people want to know about what's going on with suicide and whether this government will support a plan, a suicide prevention strategy, we don't get an answer. When we ask about cuts to education, with people losing jobs in that sector and that leaving students with less support, we don't hear a thing, Mr. Speaker. Here's hoping he'll find his voice today, because when Doug Ford or the Albany Club comes calling, he's happy to bend their ears. He's happy to go and tell them what he has to say. But let's hear what he has to say today for us. And the question today is around emergency wait times, Mr. Speaker. emergency wait times are continuing to climb in Saskatchewan. The wait times now to see a doctor in Prince Albert are 3 hours. Wow. In Saskatoon, they're 4 hours. Right here in Regina, you'll be waiting 5 hours before you see a doctor. The Sask Party used to talk a lot about emergency waits, and yet lately we don't hear very much at all. Why does the Premier think this is okay, and what will he do to decrease emergency waits? Can we hear from him today?
You're here.
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question with respect to emergency wait times specifically, but the broader investment, broader initiatives that have been put forward over the course of the last number of years in our healthcare service in our communities across this province. And if we back up a few years, Mr. Speaker, we can recall the shortage in healthcare professionals that we had in communities right across this province, Mr. Speaker. Healthcare professionals like physicians and now nurse practitioners that are offering precisely those emergency services that we are talking about here today, Mr. Speaker, offering precisely those emergency services that we look for and expect in our communities right across the province of Saskatchewan. There's a few cities, Mr. Speaker, that were referenced. I would put forward that there are now more than 900 physicians that are working in our healthcare system today than there was just over a decade, Mr. Speaker. They are adding to servicing the families that require their services across the province. We've invested in the training of Saskatchewan, born and raised physicians. We've invested in training and hiring of nurse practitioners into our system, and we will continue to invest not only in emergency wait times, Mr. Speaker, and the people that are offering those services, but continue to invest in initiatives that are lowering those wait times so that people are not waiting in our emergency rooms in the province, Mr. Speaker. We have targets around this, and we're going to continue to work towards achieving just those.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we appreciate the Premier finding his feet to answer. If only he'd had something to do with the question that was asked. The question was emergency wait times. Emergency wait times for which this government has been aggressively setting targets. They aggressively set a target of 0 waits by 2017. Then they aggressively reduced that target to 65% or 60% by 2019. Then they realized they were going to miss that one by a mile as well, so they dropped it down to 35% by 2019. And now, the target in this year's report is some reduction. Some reduction, Mr. Speaker. They keep moving the goalposts when they should be moving the ball. The question here, Mr. Speaker, while people are waiting and waiting, what is this government doing? Converted closets and hallways are where medicine has been practiced. In RUH, that practice has become so commonplace that there are now room numbers over a number of the beds in the hospitals. That's how common hallway medicine is under this government, Mr. Speaker. Why has the Premier given up on the important goal of reducing wait times?
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, members on this side of the House, including myself, are never going to give up on providing adequate health care services to the people that we represent. That's precisely why we've invested in new facilities. That's precisely why we've invested in hiring new physicians across this province, over 900 new physicians that are working in the communities that I live in, Mr. Speaker, and others across this great province. Mr. Speaker, I would put forward this, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the comments around hallway medicine. The way to get away from hallway medicine is actually to close the hospital, Mr. Speaker, which we saw over a decade ago with the members opposite, closing some 52 hospitals in communities right across this province, Mr. Speaker. With the closure of those hospitals came the removal of physicians from the system, removing 173 physicians, firing 173 physicians from the province, Mr. Speaker, providing services to the people that we represent. Mr. Speaker, we'll take no advice with respect to providing the health care services here in this province. This is a government that will continually set targets. We'll make efforts to achieve those targets. We'll make efforts to achieve those targets to provide the services that the people that have elected us, the people that we represent, expect from their provincial government.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's true this government will continually set targets. They'll set them at 100% and fail, 60% and fail, 35% and fail. Oh, now it's some reduction. Well, if you don't want to take any advice from us, Mr. Speaker, maybe you should take some advice Maybe you should take some advice from the people practicing in medicine right now. Maybe you should take some advice from the patients who are waiting right now. The wait time drops. The wait times have not dropped. In fact, they've climbed, and they continue to climb. Where's the responsibility for this government's own record? The time it takes to see a doctor is up 4 hours on average across the province. The time it takes to get a bed once you've been admitted is up over 20 hours. The length of stay in the ER is up over 24 hours. Most patients are actually waiting over a day before they get up into a bed. In Saskatoon, that's getting closer to 2 days. How much longer will Saskatchewan people have to wait before they see this government do something more than talk about reducing emergency wait times?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite wants to see the action that's going to be taken, he only needs to look back a couple months ago and read the news releases on Budget Day, Mr. Speaker. As far as reducing wait times in emergency departments, we recognize it's an issue, Mr. Speaker. We did set very aggressive targets and we haven't met them, which I spoke to in the House early in the session, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're not scared to set targets like the members opposite were. We're going to continue to do that. Mr. Speaker, we've met most of them. Some we haven't, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Recognize the Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know we have more work to do, Mr. Speaker. This year's budget announcement, we talked about 3 rapid access to addiction medicine clinics, Mr. Speaker, which we think will help ease the strain on emergency departments. Mr. Speaker, we had a number of announcements over the past few weeks on CRT teams, Mr. Speaker, in cities where there's strain in the emergency departments, Mr. Speaker. We understand that there's more work to do, Mr. Speaker. We're certainly going to do that.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Mr. Speaker, we've been calling on this government for years to meaningfully increase investments in mental health supports, and the calls have mostly gone ignored. This government brags about recent investments that are days late and dollars short, but the numbers tell the real story when it comes to mental health supports for our kids. This month, the Canadian Institute for Health Information released data on children and youth with mental disorders, and to be clear, this minister has nothing to boast about. We have the second highest rate amongst the provinces for children and youth hospitalized for mental health-related issues, and even more damning, the ones connected to substance misuse are the highest in Canada. When will this minister and this government get serious about improving the lives of young people by ensuring that when they first need mental health care, they actually get it?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I would go back to Budget Day. Mr. Speaker, we announced $30 million in new investments in mental health and addiction services, Mr. Speaker. I mentioned in the last question about the rapid access to addiction medicine clinics, Mr. Speaker. We announced approximately 50 new pre- and post-addictions beds, 75 residential support beds, in addition to Pine Lodge at Indian Head for addiction treatment beds, Mr. Speaker. Calder Centre in addition, Mr. Speaker, the list goes on. We've invested a great deal this year in mental health and addictions. We recognize how serious this issue is, Mr. Speaker. Last year we had a significant investment. We mentioned we're going to have even more so this year. We followed through with that. Mr. Speaker, in subsequent years I believe there will be significant investments. Again, we recognize how serious this is. Mr. Speaker, I find this somewhat troubling because this is an issue that all provinces grapple with across the country, Mr. Speaker. We're making significant investments. Just a few weeks ago on Budget Day, the member from Rosemount in his speech talked about this being the one shining spot of the budget in his view, Mr. Speaker, and now the critic is criticizing it.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Pointing out that we have the worst record, Mr. Speaker, just to be clear, days late and dollars short, that minister and that government when it comes to mental health and addiction support. We have among the highest national rates for young people in need of mental health care and unacceptably low supports for these children. The CIHI report shows our province is tied for last place when it comes to the number of psychiatrists who treat children and youth. And yes, psychiatrists aren't the only professionals who support these kids with mental health issues, but we ranked 7th out of 10 provinces on the combined number of professionals whose primary field is mental health issues in children. No wonder there are more than 700 children across the province who are on a wait list for much-needed mental health care. What is the minister's plan to ensure children who need mental health care get it when they first need it, so their issues don't end up eventually putting them in the hospital?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the CIHI report the member opposite is referring to talks about the 17-18 rate of hospitalization for mental disorders. It goes on discusses a number of items, Mr. Speaker. I would come back to the investments that we have made to deal with that, the ones that have just been announced. The investments talk about $1.1 million in new funding to be used to hire up to 12 new full-time staff to effectively serve children and youth with mental health issues. That's in addition to the just about $3 million invested last year, which added approximately 25 new mental health providers for children and youth, Mr. Speaker. Over $500,000 used to hire pediatric nurses and social workers to provide enhanced mental health services when the new children's hospital opens, Mr. Speaker. And the list goes on. Mr. Speaker, we certainly recognize this is a serious problem in Saskatchewan, as it is across the country. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to working on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't an issue that snuck up on us overnight. As families continue to wait for this government to take this seriously, young people continue to suffer. The number of children and youth hospitalized for mental health in Saskatchewan has doubled in the last decade. Doubled, Mr. Speaker. Our province has the highest rate of growth in all of Canada for children and youth mental health hospitalizations. Again, not a statistic about which this minister should brag. This is shameful, Mr. Speaker. With numbers like these, this government should be doing everything it can to help our children and youth who are struggling. Can the minister explain this high rate of growth and tell us what his plan is to stop it?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we're extremely concerned about this. We're committed to providing every possible service to our children and youth, Mr. Speaker. I talked about a number of the services that we have available. We're also increasing the number of nurses available to provide mental health support in Regina General Hospital Emergency Department. Mr. Speaker, $1.2 million is launching 18 new mental health walk-in counseling clinics across the province through Family Services Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, and the list goes on. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, for the member opposite to somehow insinuate that I don't care or that members on this side of the House don't care, that somehow we don't care, Mr. Speaker. That's not the case, Mr. Speaker. I know the critic cares, and I know the members opposite care about this very important issue, Mr. Speaker. So do my colleagues and I.
Recognize a member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we learned that the Saskatoon Public School Division is planning to eliminate dozens of positions for teachers, librarians, and other staff whose support is vital to our classrooms. Home economics and industrial arts are on the chopping block, and it's because of years of underfunding by this government. English as an additional language teachers will see drastic cuts, leaving newcomer students without the support they need to develop literacy and reach their full potential. Will the minister finally accept that his government's underfunding is behind these cuts in Saskatoon Public?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the premise of the member's opposite question is that there was a cut to Saskatoon Public School. In fact, there is no cut. Funding to Saskatoon Public went up over $3.5 million. Right. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite are fully aware that we look to the divisions to try and decide how to apportion and allocate the resources that are given. We see them as the experts. We see them as the ones that are closest to the situation. Mr. Speaker, Saskatoon Public School Division is working through their budget issues. The budget has to be submitted by June 30th and will eventually be approved by the ministry. And Mr. Speaker, I would encourage people in that division not to make any assumptions about what the end result might be or might not be. They have had an increase, and Mr. Speaker, we have confidence that they're going to make some very good decisions.
As a member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, I just had a flashback to the time when that former minister promised that it wasn't their fault that school boards were cutting pre-K programs for kids that are deaf and hard of hearing, and he vowed that that would not happen. But guess what? It did happen because of underfunding by this government, and no one is confused by those lines. Mr. Speaker, we received a letter from one of the people who is affected by these cuts in Saskatoon Public. Cuts made necessary because of chronic underfunding by this government. And I quote, "I have some serious concerns about the elimination of the Secretary 1 positions in elementary schools." She went on, "The people know the value of stable, fully functional front office. The people who know this are the principals as they juggle their multifaceted job, the staff who are trying to unjam the photocopier on the last minutes of their prep period, the new kindergarten families who are full of questions and worries as they leave their precious little ones for the first time." Mr. Speaker, she goes on to say, "I adore my job. It has been the best job of my life." Mr. Speaker, these cuts are real, and they're going to have real impact on students, staff, and parents. Will the minister finally accept responsibility for that?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that members opposite have chosen to engage in some fear-mongering rather than letting the school division work through what they do best. Mr. Speaker, I too have seen some of the media reports that have come out of Saskatoon Public. They're disappointed that, in fact, it's now being debated on the floor of the legislature, that we're in here doing budget debates that should be happening in the boardroom of Saskatoon Public School. But, Mr. Speaker, having said that, one of the things that I've heard is they're planning...
Order, please. Recognize the Minister.
They're planning to reduce superintendents' budget by some $320,000. Nothing against superintendents, but here are the things that they want to add to it. 4 secondary teachers, 11 elementary teachers, 17.5 educational assistants, in addition to the 21.5 that were added during the academic year, 4 resource teachers, 2 special ed teachers, 1 staff nurse for John Dolan School, and a rotational library technician. Mr. Speaker, if the members want to call that cuts, they can call it cuts, but it looks to me like the Saskatoon Public School Division is doing what they're supposed to do, putting the resources in the classroom, Mr. Speaker, and the members' office should say thank you to the Saskatoon Public School Division and quit the fear-mongering that's going on in here.
Recognize the member for John Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, this is not fear-mongering, this is reporting the facts, and we thank the very difficult job, we thank school boards for the very difficult job that they've been asked to do year after year with this government, and that is to paper over underfunding and cuts, Mr. Speaker. It's not acceptable that school divisions are forced to take difficult decisions that hurt students and staff because this government, despite the rhetoric, isn't making education a priority. In Saskatoon Public, the number of EAL students has nearly doubled since 2012. And as a consequence of this government's failure to invest, there will actually be fewer EAL teachers to provide needed supports. Does the minister understand that these are the consequences of his failure to invest in our children's future? And when will the government recognize that education is an investment in our future and give school divisions the resources that they need to deliver the education that all of our children deserve?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, let's look at some numbers at Saskatoon Public School Division. 2011-2012, which was the first time we started logging EAL teachers, there was 28.8. It's now moved up to 59.5, Mr. Speaker. 107% increase. But, Mr. Speaker, let's look at a few other things for Saskatoon Public. Regular teaching FTEs since we formed government has gone from 935 to 1,196. Student support teachers has gone up from 107 in 2007 and 2008 to 174.6. Mr. Speaker, psychological FTs gone up from 5 to 10, 100% increase. Speech language pathologists, 9.3 to 13.8. Education assistant FTs, 361 to 471. Counselor FTs, 23.5, 35.1 now, Mr. Speaker. I can go on, Mr. Speaker, but the only reason it's a cut, unless you put the brackets around the numbers, these are real numbers, they're positive numbers, and they're increases, and the members opposite should acknowledge it.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, we heard from eHealth's new CEO recently where he assured media that the organization was on track, mentioning that, among other things, he's been sending out video updates to staff. A commitment to improve morale and better communication is welcome, but one internal video raised concerns among staff and was sent our way. The CEO talked about a recent presentation given by the Minister of Health on the Dumali report. He said the report highlighted concerns about the state of the organization and the turnover in leadership. It also apparently recommended a transformation at eHealth. In the video, the CEO said of the minister's directions, quote, "This is the mandate, this is how it has to work, and he's going to be expecting regular updates," end quote. To the minister, what exactly is the new mandate of eHealth Saskatchewan dictated by the Dumali report?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a result of the transition to one health authority in the province from 12 regional health authorities, Mr. Speaker, part of the plan at that time was to obviously be more efficient and save resources, Mr. Speaker, and some of that efficiency is going to revolve around the fact that, Mr. Speaker, we're going to move to consolidating IT services in the province for healthcare, Mr. Speaker. That's been moving much slower than I would have liked to have seen, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite spoke to concerns around management and eHealth. That's been no secret. That's been discussed in this House and in the media over the past year, Mr. Speaker, and as I mentioned last week when she raised the issue about the CEO, Mr. Speaker, there's a brand new board there, just a little over a year into the job, Mr. Speaker, and a new CEO that I have great faith that's going to move this forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, this organization has been plagued with internal issues for years, and there has been a significant overhaul in the CEO, the board, and the executive. We know the transition to taking over IT for the SHA has been slow, and there are many recommendations from the auditor that have been outstanding for over a decade. There's a lot of work to be done, Mr. Speaker, and folks in the organization are anxious about what these changes mean. If this report is the new North Star of the organization, as the CEO suggests, why did the minister not mention anything about it, about this new mandate, when we sat in committee for hours? Will the minister shine a light on what he's up to and agree to table the Dumali report today?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Wow. Mr. Speaker, I've never referred to it as the new North Star, Mr. Speaker. The point of it is it's to use for internal use, Mr. Speaker, between eHealth and the SHA to deal with matters on who does what in IT, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the member stood up, I think it was last week, Mr. Speaker, and did a drive-by smear of the new CEO of eHealth, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the opposition, who keeps chirping from his seat, Mr. Speaker, talked about doing politics differently, Mr. Speaker. But what have we seen? We've seen conspiracy theories, we've seen character assassinations, Mr. Speaker, and drive-by smears of civil servants. Mr. Speaker, is he doing politics differently? He is, Mr. Speaker. He's made it worse.
Hear, hear.
Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Orders of the day.
Written questions. Question number 91, asked by Ms. Saar.
I recognize the Deputy Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order the answers to questions 91 through 96.
Good. Ordered 91 through 96.
Question number 97, asked by Ms. Saar.
I recognize the Deputy Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the answers to questions 97 and 98.
Any idea what number that was? And what are we doing with it? Table 97, 98.
Question number 99, asked by Ms. Saar.
Recognize the Deputy Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order the answer to question 99.
Ordered question 99.
Question number 100, asked by Ms. Saar.
Recognize the Deputy Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the answers to questions 100 through 104.
Tabled 100 through 104.
Question number 105, asked by Ms. Saar.
Recognize Deputy Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order the answers to questions 105 through 108.
Ordered 105 through 108. Recognize the Minister of the Economy, the Minister of Trade and Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this House do now adjourn.
It's been moved that this House do now adjourn. Pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This assembly stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.